issue. There is no way out of this crisis unless the United States and Europe are acting together with the international financial institutions. It's extraordinarily challenging, both on the substance, also because the new American administration is not fully staffed, but that's a peculiarity of our system. It helps enormously that the political atmosphere between the United States and Europe is far better now than it has been in the recent past. That doesn't give us the answers, but it provides better weather for us to find the answers. We're going to work with the Europeans. I should also say that Central and East European economies have special problems. Some of the governments, like the Polish government, have actually conducted quite responsible economic policies, but still are hurting. Others need to focus more on good policy responses to the challenge, and we're going to be working with them as well.
Let me take the chance here from Washington, because I also want to make sure our students get a chance to ask a question, and we have a microphone over here for a question. But let me give the students a chance to think and ask a question to Ambassador Fried about having the EU establish closer ties with Georgia and Ukraine, now that many people seem to be saying that MAP is going to be put on hold at the 60th anniversary summit of NATO, that the focus will not be on offering MAP to Georgia and Ukraine. But I've heard many people, both here in Washington and from Europe, saying the EU needs to sort of step into these shoes while America and others continue to help Georgia and Ukraine and remain very close to them. But I'm hearing increasingly talk of sort of the EU establishing more formal relations with Georgia and Ukraine instead of NATO.
If that's a question to me,
yes.
Happy to discuss it. Poland and Sweden together took the initiative in proposing something the EU calls the Eastern Partnership, which was intended to intensify, in the wake of the Russo-Georgian War, intensify the EU's relations with these countries. We certainly think the Eastern Partnership is a strategically sound and thoughtful move. It is not a question of NATO versus the European Union. Our purpose, beginning in 1989, was to help the countries emerging from communism and the wreckage of the Soviet Union, help them realize a European perspective. NATO enlargement and EU enlargement were means to that end. The end is a Europe whole, free, and at peace, a Europe that is secure, a Europe that is democratic. We want to use the instruments we have as best we have to serve that larger purpose. Now, both Georgia and Ukraine have a lot of work to do. Neither is even close to being ready for NATO membership. They have a right to aspire to NATO membership, and NATO's leaders at Bucharest last year concluded and decided that NATO membership will be the end state. That is the agreed goal. But they have work to do, and that will take a long time. Just objectively, it will. Therefore, the question is, how can we help these countries make the reforms they need to make to qualify for NATO, and how can we help them in using all of our tools? The United States isn't a member of the European Union, but the European Union is right to reach out, and that's what we're doing. Both countries have severe challenges. We are worried about Ukraine's financial problems, but beyond the financial problems in Ukraine, the larger problem is a political one. No country can get out of a financial crisis without political leadership. Poland had it in 1989, Hungary had it in the mid-90s, Bulgaria had it in 96, 97. The essential precondition for successful economic recovery is political leadership and sufficient, both a plan and the will to carry out that plan, and that's what Ukraine needs. We hope they can find it.
Thank you.
Another question from Washington. Dr. Harrison, a question from a student, maybe?
Is there anyone here who has a question for Ambassador Fried? If so, please, yes, great. Step up to the microphone, please, and introduce yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Martin Knapp, Webster University in Vienna, actually. I'm a little nervous, so I'm going to read. I had to write it down. You mentioned earlier about listening to our European allies. As a student living abroad for the last 6 months, I continually hear about concerns with the U.S. flexing its military might. Yesterday, I listened to Admiral Mullen's opinion that the United States military needs to prepare for continual humanitarian missions in the future. Yet this seems to be contradictory to the idea of the Smart Power Initiative that the Obama administration is touting, along with listening to our European allies. So I'm wondering, with your experience, do you see the Smart Power Initiative being integrated well with current DoD objectives?
Thank you.
Well, I wish we lived in a world where military power was never needed. And I remember in the early days of the Clinton administration, in which I also served, there was a tremendous debate on what to do with respect to the Balkans, and a great reluctance to use military force to end that conflict. And the Clinton administration, along with Europe, tried every alternative. And in the end, military force was not sufficient, but it did turn out to be necessary. Now, to some extent, it is always a failure when you have to use military force. So in Kosovo in 1999, again, the Clinton administration, we tried diplomacy first, and it failed. And NATO resorted to a military action to end the atrocities committed by Milosevic's regime against the Kosovar majority population. So I am not making an unqualified defense of the use of military power, obviously. It can be used badly. It can be used for the right purposes, but clumsily. Or it can be used smartly. It is never sufficient to use military power by itself. And in, for example, Afghanistan, it is quite clear that an answer in Afghanistan will not be found solely through increases of military effort, but only through increases of non-military effort, as well as doing things militarily. Now, those are general principles, and that's easy. What's hard is knowing how to apply it. And that's one of the hardest tasks any administration has.
Let's turn it back to you in Warsaw. I think Ambassador Fried has another 7 or 8 minutes.
Good.
So please, more questions.
So now it's a question for the audience, especially young audience. I want the students to ask, sir, you are not a student, you asked several questions. I want students to ask questions to Secretary Fried. Any takers? Here it is, there, in the back. And would you say who you are?
Of course.
Go on.
Mr. Ambassador.
Proszę.
My name is Maciek Zefowicz. Is that working?
Yes, it is. Go ahead.
I'm a student of the American Studies here at the university, and I would like to ask you about another very important issue in Polish-American relations, namely the missile defense project. It is of course a topic of utmost importance to Polish security, even more important than the membership in NATO, because the possible presence of American installations and soldiers on Polish soil means probably even more to the Polish security than even the treaty written in the best possible way. And we see that the current administration has not yet shown as many enthusiasm than the previous one about the project. So what is the position of the Obama administration, and is the new president still now willing to put missiles on our land? Thank you.
Okay. And there was a risky question. There was a risky element in the question. That means apparently that the 10 holes in the ground are more important than NATO itself. Would you agree with that?
Well, If I understood the question correctly, it is about